musicians and aspiring rock stars, I want to talk a little bit today about building better tones on guitar. Now, my thesis states that most bad tones are just a slight adjustment away from being good tones, and through gaining a little bit more understanding about the values of frequencies and some of the misconceptions surrounding guitar tone, we can create a more pleasant atmosphere for live performances. Now, bands the world over have had their live shows negatively impacted by their own guitar players, not necessarily through bad playing or poor performances, but through bad tone. You can hit all the right notes and be rhythmically perfectly in time, but if your tone's not good, it's not going to sound good. So, as a guitar player of 25 years and a live performing musician of about 15 years, I've compiled some key points to help other guitar players. And those points are that it's a fallacy that if it sounds good at low volume, it's going to sound good at high volume. Play to the strengths of your instrument, and sometimes less is more, particularly with input gain. Let's break those down just a little bit more. So one of the most common mistakes made generally by newer live guitar players is that when they're playing at their house, they're building a tone and it sounds big, it sounds massive, and it may, but for a lower volume. Now, unfortunately, tones that sound great at home at low volumes, they almost never translate well to a live stage at higher volumes in a band setting with more room for the sound to carry. Now, what happens is a lot of the frequencies and the artifacts that you can't hear at low volumes, they become much more accentuated at high volumes and can create a low, flubby, blown out sound or a high, shrill sort of sound. Now, unfortunately, the best way to learn to craft live tones is through trial and error, but that comes at the expense of having some bad sounding moments in your shows. So we're gonna do some things to kind of alleviate that a little bit. And the best thing to do to get started is to get a slightly better understanding of the value of frequencies. So that's going to take me to my next point, is playing to the strength of your instrument. As a scenario, let's say we have a classic rock band, a standard setup of a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, and a vocalist. Each one of those instruments is going to have what we'll call a home frequency range. So a place where it's going to spend most of its time in the frequency spectrum. Now, naturally, those things they're going to cross over a little bit. That's going to be inevitable. What we want to do is we want to minimize that as much as possible, and that will help us stay away from making a muddy, indecipherable sort of sound and something that sounds a little bit more intentional. So to help imagine this a little bit, I've set up a visual aid here. This is a chart that I've pulled off of musicguymixing.com, which is a really good online paid resource for learning more in depth about frequencies for instruments and home recording and things like that. So this chart is specifically for guitar frequencies. So as we can see here, anything below 80 hertz is going to be inaudible rumble or just noise. We're not really going to spend any time here as guitar players. Our bass players will spend a little bit here. This is what we call sub-bass territory. This is something you're going to feel more than you're going to hear. You can't really distinguish notes in this territory. So from 82 to 392 hertz, that's the fundamental region of guitar. Okay, that's the mid-range there. So it goes from low to about the mid side of the mid-range. Now on the high side of the mid-range, you have this 400 to 600 hertz where it says boxiness. Funny enough, this is kind of, you can hear through decades of music, certain frequencies and sounds will get trendy. During the 80s, you had the band Boston, their guitar player Tom Schultz, he was known for pushing this range really hard, creating a very distinct sort of tone. The same with Carlos Santana. But for most of your modern day music, it's going to be right here in this range. Now, most guitar amplifiers are not going to have actual controls on them that state 82 hertz and 110 hertz, so on and so forth, but they're going to have generalized controls. Now, to get a little bit better grasp of that, I've set up this here. This software is called Accedit. It's by Fractal Audio, and what this does is it allows us to set up models of guitar rigs. So for this rig, we're going to say we have our guitar, which obviously is not on screen. It's going to go into this overdrive pedal, which is not 100% necessary, but can be very helpful. I will explain this a little bit more here in just a moment. That's going to go into our amplifier, and that's going to go into our speaker cabinet. That's where the sound is going to be projected out to the audience. Now, I'm going to start right here with the amp. We're going to look at these controls in the middle right here. Basically every amplifier in the world is going to have at least these three on the left: bass, middle, and treble. Now what these translate to, bass is going to be the lower end of the frequency spectrum, mid is going to be the mid-range, that one's easy, and then treble is going to be the higher end. Now, understanding what these controls do and how we can use them as guitar players is going to greatly impact the quality of our tones. So this particular amp, the JCM 800 by Marshall, very legendary rock amp, it's got a natural mid-range to it, which is why I selected it. What we're going to do, this is kind of a jumping off point that I can use for lots of amps. The bass, I usually trim it down to about 1 or 2. It's about 1.5. We're going to start there. The middle, I like to push it a little bit, so we're going to say 6. And then the treble, most of the time, I'm going to leave it at 5. That's going to be unity. I'm not going to take anything away and risk making it sound dark. I'm not going to add anything and risk making it sound harsh or shrill. And then presence, that's kind of like your high highs. I don't like to use it much. In fact, most of the time I keep it on 0. The only time I'll ever use it is if the tone is sounding especially dark. But as a good rule of thumb is you don't want to add frequencies to overlay other frequencies. You want to take away. So if it's sounding too dark, start by taking away bass. And then from there you can add a little bit more mids, and as a last resort you could add some presence. Now, the keen eye among you all may notice that there's an empty space here. There is a tool. You don't see it on a lot of rigs, but it's very, very, very powerful. It's called a graphic equalizer. Now what that does, you have all these frequency bands here, and they're labeled for you. 31, that's going to translate to hertz. So 31 hertz, 63 hertz, 125 hertz, so on and so forth. Be careful with these. They are a quick way to tweak yourself out of a good tone. But if your amp doesn't have enough control, this is something you can add. A good way that I like to set it up is I take the frequencies that you're never going to really hear, and I trim those out completely. These right here are completely harsh. And then we're going to set up kind of a little parabola here. So bring that low. This is going to be your more powerful controls, the 250, the 500. They're right there in the range that guitar players sit in. So we can boost those up just a hair, and we can start pulling down these harsher, higher frequencies. Something like that. It's a good place to start. And remember, this is all just a jumping off point. We can do micro adjustments from here as we go. Now, this drive pedal here, that's going to tie into my third point. Sometimes less is more. So on your amp here, you're going to see the gain control. Gain is kind of a slippery slope. When you turn your gain up, you add distortion into your signal. That can make it a lot easier to play. It kind of creates a padding. I urge you not to rely on that. As you add gain and adds volume, I urge you not to use it as a volume control. Use the volume control in your amp for that. Just enough. You want just enough to do whatever style it is. If it's rock and roll, you want enough to have a little bit of overdrive. But when you have too high a gain, it adds a lot to your low end, so you get this flubby low end. It gets really fizzy sounding, and the best way to describe that is imagine taking a beehive and putting it in a metal box and shaking it up really hard. You don't want that sound. So let's say you're going to hang around here, and that sounds great for your rhythm playing. You say, well, I want to take a guitar solo. I want a little bit more gain for my guitar solo. That's fully acceptable. I like to use a tool called an overdrive pedal. This is the Ibanez Tube Screamer. I've used it for over a decade now. It's a great pedal, and there's a really cool trick that a lot of guitar players have learned with it. They take the actual drive knob, which is the gain knob, and turn it all the way down. They push the level up to about 3/4 of the way, and they leave the tone on 5. Now, what that does, because the pedal itself has its own frequency curve, that's going to hit the front of the amp harder. It's going to introduce more distortion. It's going to create more input gain. But because of that EQ curve of the pedal, it's also going to cut out the low end, and it's going to push the mid-range for you. Makes it a very helpful tool. Again, it's not 100% necessary, but it is a cheap way to really, really improve your tone. So with all that being said, come back up front here. That's going to bring me to the end of my presentation. And I want to make it clear that no single one of these things is immediately going to make you a tonal master. It's going to take experience and development of your ear over the course of years to make you as good as you can be. But by the points that I've made, those being the fallacy that good tone at home does not mean that it's going to sound good at a higher volume, playing to the strengths of your instrument, and particularly with gain, sometimes less is more. those are all a good foundation to start with. From here, you should start playing with tones that are maybe a little bit out of your comfort zone, a little bit less gain, trimming the bass off some, and if possible, and I know it's not for everybody, but if possible, play at a higher volume every now and then. It will help kind of tuning your ear to that. So putting all these this new action with this new knowledge, you should be able to start creating some crushing rock tones or some twangy country tones or even some smooth jazz tones and be ready to play the world stage. I really appreciate you listening to me, and I hope you have a great day.